Welcome everybody, thanks for visiting Epic Fox Tabletop today. We're going to be playing some Dux Britanniarum by Two Fat Lardies, Wargame Rules for Dark Age Warfare in the Age of Arthur. Actually, we're going to be starting off an entire campaign system today, and that is going to be the Saxons invading the English Isles, which are under protection of the Roman British during this time. So let's go ahead and take a look at the campaign setting. We are going to be playing in the Saxon shore. There are several different settings here, but I thought this one might be the most interesting for us to go ahead and start off with. We are going to start in the year 545 AD, and the first raid, which is taking place now, the Saxon cattle raid, is taking place in March of 545 AD. So they have the entire campaign season to try and get something going and rolling along here. Hopefully they can come up with enough money to pay off his warlord or his king. If not, at the end of this year, for some reason he's bankrupt or whatever, they will lose the game. So, and he did not start off with very much money at all. But anyway, we'll get into that here in just a moment. So let's go ahead and take a closer look. There are 5 provinces in the Saxon shore, as you can see. We are going to be starting off in that upper right province right below where it says the Saxon shore. So let's go ahead and zoom in there and take a closer look. Zooming in here, we can see exactly where this conflict is taking place. So those of you who are familiar will notice that this is the old lands of the Iceni tribes, otherwise known as Boudicca's old roaming grounds here. But we are about 500 years after that, maybe a little more. So, like I said, this campaign is starting in 545 AD, so the Saxons have already been invading widespread across the entirety of eastern England here, or Britain as it was called back then. But we're going to be focusing on this area in the start in particular, and the Saxons have already pretty much gotten a foothold in this region. So they already have control of Gaius and Branodunum, and so those are both Saxon strongholds here. The capital, the British capital of this region, is Venta Icenorum, which is where we are pretty much owing tribute to our British king, the British, and they also have to pay tribute and earn respect, reputation, etc. from their own faction king. So that is where he is based out of at this time. The Saxons have successfully raided a cattle farm within that region somewhere, not quite in towards that large city there, but on the outskirts somewhere. And they are moving back east, trying to get across that dotted border back into Gaius, or however you want to say that. Sometimes I feel like I'm stuttering severely when I'm saying some of these names. But anyway, that is where this is going to take place. Eventually, we will move into other provinces depending on the success or failures of each faction, and we'll just have to see how this campaign goes. I'm hoping it lasts for at least several battles, at least more than 1 year before somebody has to give up and call it quits. So let's go ahead and take a look at the factions and introduce their leaders and their starting forces. The first introduction I have to make is the Roman British warlord. His name is Decimus. He is on the right hand side here with that white and black patterned shield with no helmet on. The man to his left is the champion. I have not named the champions of either the Saxons or the British. Well, they're not characters that you roll stats or reputation for anyway. And also, I have a pretty good feeling that they're going to be dying with somewhat of a frequency anyway. So, I've chosen not to name them. So, back to the warlord. His name is Decimus. I rolled his age. He is 21. He's going to be the youngest player or character on the battlefield at any given time so far. His physique, I rolled an average build for him, so he doesn't have any negatives, but he doesn't have any positives either. His reputation, I did roll a reputation for him, and he came out to be bold, so he is Decimus the Bold, but that reputation does not have any effect on his character whatsoever, so it has no effect. His attributes, I did roll Master of Arms for him, which gives him an additional 1d6 in close combat. So he is a status 3 leader, which would normally get 3d6 in close combat, but with this attribute, he will be rolling 4d6 in close combat, which could very well make a huge difference. His background, he is a son of a honestore, which is +1 to the wealth roll, and that wealth roll came out along with that +1. He got a tribune's tribute, which is basically the 3 out of 10, the maximum being 10, the lowest being 0. So he's at 3 wealth right now, which isn't shabby at all, as a matter of fact. The next Roman gentleman up is Gaius. He is our leader number 1. So he's basically second in command of the Roman British, and his age is 32. His physique is also average. He did not roll any reputation, so he has pretty much a fresh start at this point. And he got lucky enough. He also rolled an attribute Master of Arms, which is the 1d6 in combat again. So the Roman British have had pretty good luck so far. His background, he was born to the purple, which would have allowed him +2 on the wealth roll, but the subordinate leaders don't get wealth rolls, so it's basically no effect. But there is an effect because that Born to the Purple also has -1 to all loyalty rolls. So depending on what happens in this campaign, how well the British do, and if there's any infighting or civil wars, whatever, if he has to take a loyalty test, he will get a -1 to that roll. And the third in command for the Roman British leader number 2, Junius. His age is 34. His physique is also average. He has no reputations. His attribute that he rolled was Devout, which at this point I don't believe it has any effect, although I do need to read a little bit more into it. His background was son of a honestore, which is the same as his warlord, which would have allowed him +1 on a wealth roll, but him being a subordinate, it has basically no effect. So there you have it. That is the leadership for the Roman Britons. Here we have the levy units of the British. So they are going to start off with 3 units, 6 men each of levy. These are the lowest class units in the game. There is nobody worse than these levy units. And yeah, so we'll see how well the British can utilize them on the battlefield. However, there is one good thing about them. They can form a shield wall, which the Saxons cannot do. The Saxons cannot form shield walls, so we'll see how that goes. The Saxons don't have any levy. Their lowest class fighters are going to be warriors, which are 1 step above levy, and then they are also going to have elite. So yeah, we'll see how they fare up in this campaign. The standard soldier for the Romano-Britons are going to be their warrior class, and they're going to have 2 units of 6, which is down in front. An easy way to distinguish these guys from the levy is, number 1, they have helmets on, whereas the levy do not. And also, if you notice in the previous picture where I showed the levy, they all have the red highlighted shields, whereas all of our warrior class for the Britons have black emblems on their shields. So that is one other very quick way of identification means for them. 6 elite warriors, or 1 group of elite warriors, is what the British will be starting off with. Hopefully, during the course of this campaign, they'll do well and maybe roll good on reinforcement charts, whatever, or at least get some replacements here to where they can get 8 men in this group, or get another group of elites altogether by means of reinforcements or upgrading one of their warrior units into elites. Either way, I think they're going to need more elite units here. So that's them, heavily armored and ready for war. And finally, we are going to have the single missile unit for the Roman Britons, and that is going to be a 4-man unit of skirmishers, of archers. So they will do their best to pelt the Saxons with accurate arrows, and if any luck, hopefully take a couple down with them. Now, moving on to the Saxon forces, we have the Saxon Warlord down in front of us on the right side. His name is Helm, and his champion is on the left of him, unnamed of course. Helm, the Warlord, his age is 24 years old. His physique, he rolled tall and strong, so kicking in doors, lifting up potential slaves, etc. He will probably get a bonus on. His reputation, he did roll reputation, and it is quiet, which has no effect to his actual attributes. The attribute that he did roll for is Constitution of an Ox, so any wound or deaths he will get to re-roll on, and that death includes the age death factor in between campaign seasons. If he does by chance die of disease or old age, he will get to re-roll that stat. So assuming he's doing well in the campaign, that should be a very useful attribute to have. His background, he rolled a son of a peasant. Maybe that had something to do with his why he has a constitution of an ox. He grew up hard working in hard times already. But anyway, son of a peasant, he got -2 on the wealth roll, and when he did come out with the wealth, he got a beggar's bowl, which is the lowest you could have without being dead broke. It's a 1 out of 10, and at the end of the first campaign season, he's going to owe at least 1 wealth to his king in tribute. So assuming he doesn't make any successful raids and gets no loot from this entire campaign year, he will be broke at the end of this campaign season. So it is going to be vital for him that he does succeed in at least a couple raids and gets a little income coming in. The next Saxon heathen I have to introduce is Afton. He is leader number 1, second in command of the Saxons. His age is 30 years old. His physique is average. He has no reputation, and his attribute that he rolled is horseman, which he's outstanding cavalryman, horseman, etc., which pretty much has no effect because, as you can see, he's not on a horse. His background, he rolled Wodenborn, which is -1 to the wealth roll, which is no effect because he's a subordinate leader, and he did receive +1 to his loyalty roll, so he is pretty loyal to Helm, his warlord. I also happen to like this figure very much for some reason, I don't know. Third in command for the Saxons is this brutal looking fellow. He is leader number 2, third in command, Daigle. His age is 28, physique is tall and strong. His reputation is a martyr, which has no effect as of right now. The attributes is lustful, so he has -1 to loyalty rolls. And his background, he rolled son of a peasant, which is -2 on the wealth roll, which of course for subordinates, as you have heard many times by now, has no effect. So he's -1 on the loyalty roll. So hopefully Afton there can offset him with his +1 loyalty roll. Was it +1 or +2? Let me look here really quick. It was a +1. So, and this guy has a -1. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the actual forces. First up are the 3 warrior units of the Saxon force here, and these guys are going to be the backbone of the Saxons. A total of 18 warriors in 3 different groups, and they will be responsible for chopping and slaughtering as many Britons as they can get their hands on. They cannot form shield wall, as I have stated earlier, so that is a disadvantage, and we'll see just how much that affects the Saxons in the future. Next we have the Saxon elite warriors, heavily armed, large shields, and ready for war. A total of 12 Saxon elite warriors in two groups of 6. So yes, the Saxons have the edge on quality soldiers, but the Roman Britons have the edge on quantity. So we are going to see basically a classic showdown of quality versus quantity here until we start to see some reinforcements come in, etc., and the forces themselves start to adapt and change with the campaign. But as the start shows, that's how we be looking. And the final unit for the Saxon force here are their missile unit, and they could either have had archers or javelins. They have archers because that's what I happen to have in my giant pile of metal. I didn't have any Dark Age Saxon looking javelin men, so they got the bowmen, just like the Roman Britons. Hopefully for the Saxons, they can pelt their foes with arrows before they can be run down and slaughtered like the skirmishers they are. So here is a look at the battlefield itself. It's going to be a little bit backwards directional wise because that's just the way I happen to be standing when I was taking these pictures. Actually, I probably should have stood on the other side of the table. Anyway, I digress. Here's the battlefield. Over on the left hand side of the screen, you can see the tape measure strung across the board there, as well as 2 dice, 2 D20s, I believe they are. Maybe they're just D12s, I can't remember. But anyway, the dice are going to be the force morale trackers for both forces, the green being the Saxons, the gray being the Britons. The tape measure will be moved during play. I just wanted to show you where that border is. The border is where the dice and that bush in between the dice are. That is where the Saxons are attempting to cross and get across that border into safety. If they can get the cattle across that line, then they will win. There's 3 stands of cattle that they're going to start off with, which are going to be one of these pictures that you're going to see here. They need to get a minimum of 2 stands of cattle off that board. So whoever's escorting them will have their movement brought down to 2d6 centimeters per turn. And if they roll doubles, those cattle will go in a random direction instead of in the direction they are being prodded in. So it's going to be kind of sketchy for the Saxons to get them across there. Hopefully they'll be able to utilize the terrain, and it also depends on where the Saxons come in at. So the layout of this board, the way you were looking at it in the beginning, is where the border is east. They're trying to get back across into their friendly territory. Down is north, the right side is going to be west, and the top is going to be south. So like I said, it's bass-ackwards here because of where I was standing on the table, but you can see some of the terrain here that I've placed, oak tree, a couple hills, and some bushes around. The bushes will impede movement slightly. It's light terrain, and it will break a shield wall formation as well. You can see my cows that I painted up and based not too long ago. Actually, last week I did. And then a couple other shots of the hills and a close-up shot of the force morale dice and the border. And yeah, now we can go ahead and take a look at the fate cards I drew for each side, and we're just about ready to get this started. Alright, the Saxon starting hand, they started off automatically with 1 suit card of aggressive charge and 1 suit card of goad. Any Saxon's suits, which are the boars on the cards, those can be used at any time during the game, even during the opponent's turn. All other cards can only be used during a Lord or Noble's current activation. So they did automatically start off with aggressive charge and goad, and aggressive charge will give a +1 to hit during the first round of combat when they charge. Goad will distract a supporting unit and keep it from supporting a combat if they're within the supporting distance to help their comrades out, then Goad will interrupt that and keep them from supporting a combat. Audacia is one that they drew, Step Forth is another that they drew, and Bounding Move is the third card that they drew. Bounding Move was a good draw because that will allow them to get an additional 1d6 of movement for a unit in any given turn, so that might come in handy. And for the Roman British, their hand, they did start off with Shield Wall Braced as well as Hero of the Age. Hero of the Age will allow a lord or noble to go crazy in the midst of combat, but it will also increase the chances of him being hit himself. Shield Wall Braced will improve a shield wall formation. Although Shield Wall Braced is not a suit card, so that must be played as a leader activation. So if a leader activates a unit to move into place and form a shield wall, that's already 2 activations there, so he wouldn't be able to play a third shield wall or play Shield Wall Brace as third activation unless it was the British Lord. Then he could use a third activation to play that card. Other than that, the subordinate leaders will have to time it carefully in order to get that activation off. Either form a shield wall in advance and slowly move into position, or rush into position, get there in time to set up, form a shield wall, and then play Shield Wall Brace on the following turn before they're charged. So it'll be a little tricky to play for a subordinate leader. They also got Disengage, which would be useful if they're getting their butt kicked or if the skirmishers get engaged. Desperate is basically a blank card. It's like a joker card. So they'll be taking a turn a little down the road to discard that and draw another card. And then they got Carpe Diem, which allows them to play multiple cards or use in the pursue or retreat phase at the end of the game. And that's about it. So now it's time to go ahead and get this game started. So yeah, I'm excited. Let's go ahead and see what happens. So at the start of the game here, the Saxons are going to get 1d3 worth of turns to come onto the board from the west with their cattle and start to move their way east to try and get as close to the border as they can before the Romano-British come on in a random section of the board, which they'll roll for after the British take their initial turns. They did happen to get they rolled a 3, so they're going to get 2 turns to go ahead and come onto the board, and that's how they came onto the board right here. You can see it looks like the elites are on the left of our screen with the cattle right behind them. The Warlord has 2 groups of warriors in the back flanking the cattle, and there's 1 group of warriors with the Saxon leader number 2 out in front there. So we're going to see how much movement they get during their second free turn, which is going to happen right now, and we will go ahead and take a look at that. And that is what they have. You can see that the elites and the cattle both got short little stinty moves going forward. The leader number 3 with his single group of warriors got a pretty big rush there and kind of went out front, and the Warlord and his 2 groups of warriors are kind of hanging right there next to the cattle. So that's how it's looking for the Saxons at this time. Here pretty soon we are going to see the British come on in just a moment, so they're going to go ahead and roll now to see where they're going to come on. Okay, at the start of the official turn number 1 here, the Romano-British had to roll a d6 to determine what table edge and what section they were going to enter on, and they rolled a 6, which is going to be the northeast corner of the map there. You can see I have marked the border of their entrances with the 2 arrows, so they will have to come on between those 2 arrows there in the lower right section of the map there. It's not really what the Saxons were hoping for, to tell you the truth, because it's now going to be a basically a breakthrough for the Saxons. They're going to have to break through the British lines to cross that eastern border there. They were kind of hoping that the Saxons were going to be coming on closer to them along one of their flanks, and that way they could have just turned one or two groups of warriors there to stall the British advance while the cattle and a supporting group ran off between into the hills and across the border there into safety. So it's the first thing that's gone wrong for the Saxons. Let's see how they deal with it. But we are going to start drawing cards now to determine turn order. And one thing I also need to mention also is the entire British force will not be coming onto the board during this first turn. They actually had to roll another d6 after determining what board edge they were going to come on. They are going to have a vanguard group come on, and that's how many groups they got to roll for. They rolled for 4 units, so 4 of their groups will be coming on this turn. The groups they chose are the group of elites, their 2 groups of warriors, and their 1 missile group. Their rear guard will be their 3 groups of militia, which will come on during the following turn. In the meantime, the first card that I drew was the Saxon Leader 1 card, and they went ahead and they moved 9 centimeters straight forward. They rolled 9 on 3d6. And so you can see their movement there. They are advancing in between the oak tree and the bushes, trying to get to the hill and plug the gaps in between the 2 hills, kind of force a hole there against any British forces that may muster in that area. Card number 2 for this turn was the British Lord, and he will be entering on the board from that section. You can see him right here. He rolled 3d6 and came up with 10 centimeters. And so he got a little bit of a good move coming on the board there. It's a good start. He's going to rush over there, trying to get up on that hill and outmaneuver the Saxons at this point. We'll see how far that goes. Card number 3 is the British leader Gaius. He's the British leader number 1, and he comes onto the board with 13 centimeter move, and got a good little kick there. So he's out there in line with the British Warlord, and they will see what kind of movement they can get in the future. I think he is going to try and get his guys over to plug that gap between the 2 hills and form a shield wall before the Saxons can manage to get there. So it looks like that's what his intentions are going to be right from the start. And the next card is the Saxon Lord. So he will be moving, looks like a total of 9 centimeters, and he kind of advanced laterally along the northern edge of the board. He's going to shoot along that northern side and try and threaten the British flank there. That way the entire British force can't just rush and try and get in front of the cattle. They're going to have to address the Saxon Warlord along that northern flank there. You can see also that group's facing changed. They didn't wheel. What they did is they took advantage of their full 9 centimeter move to try and rush ahead, but their facing changed. So if anybody was to rush them from, a perpendicular angle there, it would be pretty close to a flanking attack, and that's the danger of doing that maneuver when you're close to the enemy. Luckily, they got plenty of room to maneuver and recover on that and change their facing in the future, but just keep that in mind. If you're moving laterally when you're close to the enemy, you are going to be exposing yourself to deadly flank attacks. Next card drawn was the Saxon Missiles, and they are escorting the cattle, trying to prod them along there, so they're only going to get 2d6 movement. They rolled a whopping 6 centimeters, which is next to nothing, so they hobble along forward, trying to push those fat cows forward as fast as possible. Looks like they may be doing it partly in vain, though, so wasn't a very good move on their part. Hopefully they can do better in the future. Next card was Saxon Leader number 2, and he is just advancing forward for the most part at a speed of 7 centimeters. He's just kind of going forward, trying to judge and see what the British are going to do, and then react from there. He's kind of the auxiliary unit for the Saxons at this time. He's going to react where needed and help out wherever he can. So we'll see what happens here in the future with that group. And the final card drawn for this turn is the Saxon Missiles, and the British Missiles, and they moved a leaping and bounding 15 centimeters. They're rushing forward, trying to get to that hill. It looks like they're going to get up on top of that hill and see if they can start hitting the Saxons with some steady arrows in there, see what they can do. Afterwards, we can see here an overview of the battlefield and take a look. That is where all of the forces lay at this point. The next turn, the British militia, the levy, will be added into the card draw pile as well, so they will be entering the board next turn also. So let's go ahead and start off the next turn. Okay, start of turn 2. Here is Saxon leader number 1, Afton, and he moves 12 centimeters forward, so he's still rushing, trying to sort of form a battering ram there to get through that hillside, those 2 hills, which is sure to become a hot spot here in this battle. So we'll see how quickly they can move up and who beats who where. The next card is British leader number 2, Junius, who is in charge of the levy. They're going to enter the board kind of moving laterally from their entrance there, and they move straight along that northern edge of the battlefield. Looks like they are going to challenge the Saxon Warlord, who's threatening that flank along that northern side there. So that's them. They have not formed a shield wall yet, of course, because they're moving, and levy cannot wheel after forming a shield wall, so they're going to have to get situated and set before they form into their appropriate formation there. Third card drawn during turn number 2 is the Saxon Missiles, who are prodding the cattle along. They rolled an 11 on 2d6, so they got a pretty big boost there. Moved forward a healthy amount along with their cattle. Thankfully, they didn't roll any doubles or anything, and they got to choose the direction. So that's the Saxon Missiles with their cows, trying to keep up with the main Saxon force. And right after the Saxon Missiles, the British Missiles get their turn. And they run forward 12 centimeters, get to the top of that hill, and they have a line of sight to the Saxon elites there advancing, and they are just within range at 20 centimeters. It's a long range, but they're going to take their shots. They did move, so they're going to get a -1 penalty due to that move. They're going to roll 4d6, 1d6 for each shooter at long range. That's going to come out to needing 6s to hits. They roll 4d6, and they rolled no hits. So their arrows missed their mark, but at least they are there, and their next turn, hopefully they can start shooting more accurately. Next group up is Saxon leader number 2, Daigle, with his one group of Saxon warriors. Looks like he now has a clear objective in mind. He's going to be rushing that hill, trying to eliminate those British archers at this point. So that's where they are headed. Next card drawn is British leader number 1, Gaius, and Gaius is going to take his 2 groups of warriors, and he's still moving forward there, trying to get around the bend and plug the gap in between those 2 hills there. So it's a race between the British warriors and the Saxon elites to see who can get there first. The Saxons are going to try and bend that corner that you see in the top left of the screen there and face off against the warriors before they can plug that gap, allowing their cattle to get through. The British warriors are going to try and get there first to plug that gap. That way the cattle have to go around and find an alternate path to their border. The 7th card drawn was the British Lord. He moved 7 centimeters forward. Looks like he's going to try and get up on that hill to support the archers and break through any attacks that do come that direction, and then maybe perhaps make a direct attack on the cattle prodders themselves. We'll see. He's not moving very fast ever since his first turn on there, so we'll see how he can manage to get his elites up that direction. Next, we had the final card, which was the Saxon Warlord, and he moved a total of 7 centimeters as well along that northern border, so he's not making very good headway either, but it looks like he's going to be going toe-to-toe with the British levy, who are directly in front of his path. Something tells me he's going to be able to smash through them within a turn or two of combat. We'll see how quickly he can get engaged. The faster he can get up there into contact with them, the better, and the better off the Saxons will be. Finally, we can take a look at the entire battlefield after turn number 2. That is where all the forces lay. We have the archers up on the hill ready to start shooting at the Saxons from a pretty good vantage point, and all the other forces are pretty much determining who they're going to be lining up in combat with. I think it's pretty much set at this point who's going to be fighting who. It's all a matter of who can get into the better position before their opponent. So let's go ahead and step right into turn 3. Start of turn number 3 here. First card drawn is going to be the Saxon Missiles, who are going to prod their cattle along 9 centimeters forward. Another decent move for them. They get right up on the tail end of the Saxon elites, and that's where they are at their third move there. So the second card is going to be the British Missiles, and you can see here they are going to take some shots at the Saxon elites once again. They are 4d6 at long range. This time they didn't move, so they're going to need 5s or 6s to hit. So they roll 4d6, and once again they get no hits. So a little bit more disappointment for the British from their archers, but what can you expect? They are archers. There's only 4 of them too. The third card drawn is going to be the British leader number 2, which is Daigle again, or excuse me, that's the Saxon leader number 2. British leader number 2 is Junius, along with his levy, and he is going to wheel them basically pretty much perpendicular to the board edge as well as that hill there, forming a pretty solid stop block measure for the British in their flank. He is also going to use an activation to form a shield wall and bring those guys into a nice and tight formation to challenge that warlord. So pretty much they're at a point where they can just sit and wait where they are at. Card number 4 came up, and it is Saxon leader number 1, Afton, along with his 2 groups of elites. He is going to use a card, and that is going to be Bounding Move, so it's going to give him an extra 1d6 on his movement. So he rolls 4d6 for movement, and it came out to a total of 14 centimeters. So he got a pretty big boost from there. He has gotten almost directly in between the 2 hills. That's pretty much going to ensure some sort of hole for the cattle to get through that hole, as long as the Saxons can get around that bend and wheel around and create the space needed for the Saxon missiles to get their cows through. So after he was done, he got to draw a card to replace that card he used, and he drew True Aim, which isn't going to be very helpful for the Saxons because their missile soldiers are prodding cows along and they're not really focused on shooting any targets at this point. The 5th card drawn is going to be British leader number 1, Gaius, along with his 2 groups of warriors, and he rolled a 12 on the movement, so he got 12 centimeters forward. They may, depending on who gets the card draws first, they may be able to plug that gap before the Saxon elites can wheel around and guarantee enough space for the cattle. So it's going to be interesting to see who gets the initiative the next couple turns. Next up is Helm, the Saxon Lord. He rolled, what did he roll? 11 centimeters forward. He got 11 forward. So he is pretty much in charging range now. Depending on the dice roll, he may or may not make contact next turn. It's looking like the average says yes, he probably will. So we may see some combat here very shortly. Card number 7 is the British Lord, and once again he has a very dismal roll, 6 centimeters. He is just not getting those guys moving whatsoever. Must be the heavy armor and some heat. Maybe it's really humid out. I don't know. Maybe his guys are grumpy, but he's having a really hard time getting his elite group going and getting up that hill. He's leaving the archers pretty exposed up there on top. Hopefully he can come up with a good initiative and a good roll next turn for his sake. And the final card for turn number 3 is going to be Saxon leader number 2, Daigle. And he's going to move his single group of warriors up closer towards that hill and closer towards those unprotected British archers. So it'll be interesting to see once again who gets the initiative where. There's a couple spots on the battlefield that are like that, as we can see here. As we take a widescreen look at the entire battlefield, we can see there's a couple places that are getting ready to have contact very soon. Actually, it looks like all 3 points of contact. You got on the north side of the hill, which is down at the bottom of the screen. You have on the large hill itself, which is in the middle, and then you have south of the hill, which is above the hill, where the Saxon elites are now getting ready to punch a gap through that hole, and the warriors are going to try and challenge them. They're going to try and wheel and plug that hole there to where the Saxons don't have room to squeeze that cattle through. It'll take a whole lot more time for them to go up and around that smaller hill, so the Saxons definitely do not want to have to do that. We'll see how it goes going into turn number 4. So, start of the turn, card number 1 is the Saxon Lord Helm. He is going to attempt to charge into the levy shield wall, and he rolls 10 centimeters, which is enough to get into contact. The Lord Helm is also going to play a card, Aggressive Charge, which is going to add +1 to all to hit rolls in the first round of combat. Now I am going to take the time to explain the combat here and the way it works, and also show pictures of the die roll as well. So we can go ahead and talk about it. The Saxons have 12 men, so they're going to get 12d6 attacks from those 12 men. Their Lord is a status 3, so that's going to be 3d6 as well, for a total of 19, or excuse me, I didn't include the rest of them. So they also have a champion, which is going to add 2d6, and their superiority is going to be 2d6 because they are above levy and they have 2 groups that are above in superiority. So they're going to get 2d6 from that. So the 12d6, the 3d6, 2d6, and 2d6 are a total of 19 attacks that they're going to roll. The Roman British have 18 men, but only 14 in contact. The levy can only overlap 1 from each side. So that is, along with their noble, who's a status level 2, is going to add 2d6 to that bunch. So they're going to get a total of 18d6 attacks, even though they have a lot more men than the Saxons. It's, you know, the difference is minimal. They're still getting less attacks than the Saxons because they can't bring those forces to bear because they're stuck in a shield wall formation as well. They don't want to break that shield wall formation. So we'll go ahead and roll for hits on both sides before I explain wounding. The Saxons once again are going to get 19d6, and they go ahead and roll, and this is what they came up with, which you see in front of you. They rolled a total of 14 hits. They needed 4 5s or 6s, plus they used that card, so they got a +1 to hit. So the Saxons will hit on 3 4 5s or 6s, and you can see right there in front of you, like I said, they got a total of 14 hits. And now it's time for the Roman British. They are going to roll a total of 18d6, and they will only hit on 4, 5, and 6, which is the normal hit factors. They did not use any card or anything like that, so They are a little bit at a disadvantage there, as you can see by the results. They rolled a total of 7 hits, which is half of what the Saxons rolled. Now we can go ahead and talk about the wounding rolls. So after you determine what or how many hits each side rolled, then you can go ahead and determine casualties caused by those hits. Now it depends on what kind of class fighter you are attacking, whether it's levy, warriors, or elite. And in this case, the Saxons are attacking levy, so any ones will be a miss. 2, 3, or 4s will cause a point of shock, and 5 or 6 will equal a kill. So you can see they had a pretty darn good roll there in front of you. They rolled 14 die for their 14 hits, and they came up with only 2 misses. They caused 7 shock and 5 kills. Now, the British are in a shield wall, so they are going to ignore one of those kills, so that 5 kills will be reduced to 4 kills because of the shield wall. And now the British casualty rolls here against the Saxons. They are attacking warriors, so one class above, and they are going to have the factor of this. 1 or 2s will be misses, 4 or 5s will be a shock, and a 6 will be kills. They actually had a pretty darn good roll for only having 7 dice, as you can see there. So they came out with 3 6s, so 3 kills, 2 points of shock, and 2 misses. That's pretty darn good for the combat there. And that is going to conclude the first round of combat. So let's go ahead and take a look at the groups themselves. Okay, so this picture is actually after the second round of combat, but let's go ahead and still talk about that first round. Because there was 3 British killed by the Saxons, and there was 3 Saxons killed by the British. So it's going to be a draw, but we still need to do the leader wound rolls. And since there was 3 wounds or 3 kills caused on the Saxons, they're going to have to roll a single d6, and they're going to need to roll above a 3. So 4, 5, or 6, and he'll be okay. He rolled a 5, so there was no wound on the Saxon Lord. The British leader is also going to need a 5 or 6, because actually there was 4 killed. There was 4 British killed by the Saxons, so he's going to need a 5 or a 6. And he rolled a 4, so the British leader was wounded. He's a status 2 leader. That's going to take his status down to level 1. One more hit on him and he will be a dead leader. So the British definitely don't want that. And because a leader was wounded, they need to take a force morale roll, and they rolled a 4, which equals minus 1 point on the force morale. So their force morale goes down from a 5 to a 4. So the British, as of this round of combat, have taken some hits to their morale overall, and they're not happy about it. And so basically, after the first round of combat, you have 3 Saxon dead with 2 shock, and 3 British dead with 7 shock. How I only took off 3 British, it's not very clear in the rules here, but I think it's common sense. If one of those wounds are allocated to a leader, I deduct it from the total kills. It still counts as a kill in terms of combat results, but I remove 1 less figure from the actual casualties because one of those kill rolls goes to wounding the leader. That's how I see it. I don't know if others play it that way, but that's how I play it. It just makes sense to me like that. So we went ahead, and because it was a draw there and there was no withdrawal from either side, we go ahead and we go into the round 2 of combat, where the Saxons are going to attack with 16d6 and the British will be attacking with 13d6. Both sides are going to hit on 4, 5s, and 6s once again. The Saxons scored a total of 8 hits, which equaled 6 shock and 2 kills, minus 1 kill for the shield wall. So 6 shock and 1 kill. The British scored 4 hits. They had 1 miss, 2 shock, and 1 kill. The British had one group overall with excess shock. As you can see down there, that group on the bottom of the picture, the one with 7 shock, those D6s are totaling shock for each group there. So they do have that one group with 5 levy left who have 7 shock. So that's considered excess shock. They need to withdraw 2 centimeters for each excess point of shock. So they withdraw a total of 2 centimeters, which we will see right here in this next picture. And that is how the combat looks after the end of round 2 there. So the Roman British are definitely at a point of breaking. They could have fallen back as a group, and in hindsight, that is what they should have done, as fallen back as a group. Instead, they broke that formation on the far right side, that group with excess shock. But hey, we live and learn from our mistakes. Next time I won't be doing that. I'll keep them together as a group and withdraw as a group. So yeah, that's where it is. And I also think it's probably pertinent to mention there is only 2 rounds of combat in any given instance of combat. It will continue once that British leader draws a card and activates. There will be another 2 rounds of combat in there. So we will have 2 more rounds of combat with those folks in this turn. Also, I did roll for leader wounds during that second round, and neither of them got wounded, so that was a plus for both sides. And now we can go ahead and go to the second card draw of the turn, which turns out to be the British Missiles, and they are going to take advantage once again of their vantage points and fire at the Saxon elites at this time close range. They're going to need 4s, 5s, or 6s with their 4 shots, so they're going to roll 4d6, and they come up with 2 hits. And then they take their wound rolls. They come up with 1 miss and 1 shock. So they cause 1 point of shock on the Saxon elites. The third card drawn is Saxon leader number 2, Daigle, and his one group of warriors. He rolls 9 centimeters trying to charge into the archers, comes up 1 centimeter short and does not make contact. That's no bueno for the Saxons, man. They were really hoping to get in there and take out those archers. That would have been a quick, easy bonus to the Saxon victory there, potential Saxon victory. Card number 4 is the Saxon Missiles, and they managed to prod their cattle 7 centimeters forward. You know, could be better, could be worse, I guess. 7's the average on 2d6s, so you know, at least they're not doing below average. Card number 5 is British leader number 1, Gaius, and his 2 groups of British warriors. He manages to move 10 centimeters, which wasn't quite as much as he had hoped for. But he doesn't want to take the chance with losing initiative and getting caught out of shield wall, so he goes ahead and orders with his second activation his groups to form a shield wall. So that's where they are at. If by chance they do get initiative during the next turn, then they'll be able to wheel and maybe plug that gap. The thing is the Saxon leader number 1 with those elites, they haven't taken their activation this turn, so more than likely they're going to be able to charge in the contact and maintain some sort of gap for the Saxon missiles to get their cattle through if they can get a move on at any point in the near future. And speaking of which, the next card drawn was Saxon leader number 1, Afton, and his 2 groups of elites. He rolls his movement. He gets 8 centimeters, which is enough to come into contact. So he plays the card Aggressive Charge, which is going to give him +1 to hit on his first round of combat as well. So during this first round of combat, we went ahead and we resolved it quick time without showing you the results. I think this video is going to drag on long enough anyway. So anyway, the Saxons ended up causing 3 kills and 3 shock, but the British were in a shield wall, so it actually came out to be 2 kills and 3 shock. The British struck back, and they got 1 kill and 2 shock, and they wounded Afton as well. So yeah, that's where they're at. Afton now has 1 wound on him. So we do need to go ahead and go into the second round of combat as well. So we'll take a look. And we can see here that during the second round of combat, the Saxons caused 4 hits, 2 shock, 0 kills. The Britons struck back with 8 hits, causing 4 shock and 1 kill. No leader wounds this time, thankfully. Combat ends +1 favor of the British. Saxons do not have any excess shock, so they will hold where they're at, but that is rather surprising to me. I thought that the Saxon elites were going to steamroll those warriors. Did not work out that way whatsoever. Card number 7 was the British leader number 2, which is Junius with his levy, and that is going to be an ongoing combat over there with the Saxon Warlord. The first round, the Saxons hit 4 times. They caused 2 shock and 1 kill, but that levy's in a shield wall, so it knocked that kill down to 0. The Brits caused 3 hits, 1 shock, and 1 kill. So the round ended with the Brits up by 1, but there was no excess shock on the part of the Saxons. So the British are showing excess shock, and after that shock caused, they caused just enough shock to give excess to both groups, as you can see here. And the British, even though they won the combat, they're going to be forced to withdraw a total of 1 centimeter. The Saxons easily keep up their pursuit with them and maintain contact, so there is going to be a second round of combat. During the second round, the Saxons caused 6 hits. They do 3 shock and 2 kills, minus the 1 because of the shield wall. So they cause 3 shock and 1 kill. The British strike back. They hit 3 times and only cause 1 shock. One of the group routes from the British line, and that causes -1 point of force morale, bringing their total down to 3. So that combat over there is doing a lot of harm for the British morale as that warlord just chops down through those levy. And yeah, that's where we're at right with that combat. And the 8th and final card drawn of this turn is the British Lord, and he is going to attempt to charge up the hill into the single group of Saxon warriors, and he rolls 6 centimeters, just short of making contact with them. Like I said before a couple times previously already, he's having some trouble getting his guys going. He should have been well over the crest of that hill by this time of the battle. Instead, it's not looking too good. I mean, if the Saxons get initiative with that grouping and run down the archers for the easy force morale, or he can get the high ground against the elites, maybe possibly make contact with both of those groups, as a matter of fact. I don't know. We'll have to see who gets initiative. At the end of the turn here, you can see the layout of the map and where things stand. It's getting pretty bloody across the entire map here. The final group of levy that did rout from the British line, they rolled 3d6 of movement towards their friendly edge, which is the edge they came on from, and that was enough to flee off the table. So that group has routed and gone off of the table. And now we can go ahead and get started on the next turn. Okay, turn number 5 is about to begin here, and the first card drawn is the British Lord. And he's going to charge into contact with those Saxon warriors there. He rolls 4 centimeters. That's been his story this whole entire game. But thankfully, that's enough to get into contact. So that's going to take us into the first round of combat. And the Saxons are going to play the suit card Strong Arm. And that's going to allow them to throw missiles for each guy that they have in that group. And on a 5 or 6, it's going to cause shock. They end up throwing 7 missiles, including their leader, and come up with a total of 4 shock. So it was a pretty darn good roll there. They pelt the British Warlord and his group pretty good. After combat, or excuse me, now on to combat, the British cause 6 hits. They had 10d6 in combat. And they caused 1 shock and 2 kills. The Saxons were downhill from the British, and they had 8d6. They hit twice and only caused 1 point of shock. So the British won by +2, and the Saxons withdrew 2 centimeters, which also allowed the British to maintain contact within that 2 centimeter zone. So we go ahead and we go on to the second round of combat. And the British hit with 10d6. They caused 7 hits, and they hit 7 times, caused 2 points of shock, and 4 kills. Plus, they wounded the Saxon leader there, Daigle. They wounded Daigle, and so that brought the total kill count down to 3 models removed, and the 1 wound to the leader, but it's still a total of 4 kills in terms of results. They did roll for force morale. They lost a point, which brings the Saxons down to 4 morale versus the British 3. The Saxons struck back with 6d6, and they were downhill from the British. They hit twice. They caused 1 shock and 1 kill. The British won by +3. The Saxons routed in full. They lost 2 points of morale with a horrible morale roll, and that brought their morale down to 2 total. The British are at 3 morale at this point. The next card drawn is Saxon leader number 1, Afton, and that is an ongoing combat over here in between the 2 hills. Let's see if the Saxons come back and get something going. The Saxons are going to be attacking with 13d6. They score 7 hits. They cause 3 shock and 2 kills, minus the 1 for the shield wall, so it comes to a total of 3 shock and 1 kill. The British strike back, and they attack with 12d6. They hit with 11 hits. Thankfully, their casualty roll were nowhere near as good as that. They caused 1 shock and 2 kills, but it was still enough for the British to win by +1. There's still no excess shock on the Saxons, though, so Afton and his elites hold the line where they're at, and this is going to bring us to combat round number 2. During round number 2, the Saxons hit with 11d6. They score a measly 3 hits. They got 1 kill, minus the 1 for shield wall. No kills, no shock. The British strike back with 11d6. They hit 6 times and cause 3 kills. The British won the combat by 3. The Saxon elites rout. They lose 2 force morale, bringing the Saxons down to 0. The entire Saxon army routs off the map. The Brits do not contest the withdrawal. They do not want to take any more losses because there is still a warlord and his group down there that if they get in contact with him, it could be dangerous. So they do not contest the withdrawal. They simply let them by, minus the cattle. They do not let the cattle go, of course, and the Saxon missiles flee off from them. So that's going to bring the cattle raid to an end. The Saxons fail. I for sure thought the Saxons were going to have that early on. Mistakes were made on both sides, I think. But, you know, I think it all just came down to poor dice rolling on the Saxons' part, especially those last couple conflicts between the warlord, the British lord up on the hilltop, as well as the Saxon elites down in between the hills. You know, I think if the dice would have been the other way around, I think the battle would have gone the other way. Neither card got to put their fate hands into much use. So, you know, we'll see what we roll for the next mission here. But as of right now, this battle is over. So the Ducks campaign, after the raid number 1, it is a British win. The British win total, they get +2 points for the win. They lost 13 men, so it's -2 points. They lost 9 levy, which is minus another point. They killed 17 Saxons, which is +2 points. That gives them a total of +1 on their win margin. The Saxons lost 17 men, so that's minus 2 points. They lost 8 elites, which is minus another 1 point. They killed 13 men, which is plus 2 points. That total brings them to minus 1. That brings the British victory margin to plus 2. So they're going to gain a beggar's bowl of wealth. They now are at wealth number 4 on the scale, which is a patrician's purse. Their losses are moderate and will be replaced in 1 month. The Saxons do not get any plunder, and it will take them 2 months to replace their losses, although it should be 3 months. I'll look up the exact status. But yeah, it's going to take them a couple months. So this being March, it's going to be at least May, if not June, before they can launch another attack, which is already going to be about halfway through the campaign season. That's where we're at. The Saxons made no progress whatsoever, and the British are sitting pretty comfy back in their holds, drinking mead and eating some pig roast and all sorts of stuff, man. But anyway, thanks for watching this, guys. Thanks for sitting through it. I appreciate it very much. Welcome to all my new subscribers, and thanks for all the comments, all the views. Your support means a lot. Please let me know what you think of this battle report, if you think I should have done it a different way, if the sound was right, if the intro was annoying, whatever. I don't care. I can take constructive criticism. Until then, guys, stay safe. Thanks again, and see you guys next time.